Hello, my friends, and welcome to Spaniard School of Student Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie the Spaniard Brenneman, and this is episode number 47. You do have the strength. So I created this podcast before I dive into the content of today's episode. I created this podcast as a former Spanish teacher and UFC fighter. Post-fighting, I started speaking in schools, doing assemblies, middle schools and high schools mostly. And I created this podcast as part of my mission to help you overcome adversity, help you make positive choices, to help you deal with the issues and challenges that life is throwing your way. So I use all of my experiences from growing up a wrestler, all of my experiences from professional fighting, all of the books that I read behind me, and also from your feedback. So if you're listening to this podcast episode, I encourage you to message me, right, at Charlie Spaniard on social media. The links are below. If you're listening via your podcast app, the links are in the show description. I encourage you to share with me questions you have, topics you'd like me to talk about, because that is essentially what the Spaniard School podcast is about, helping you navigate or get through the ups and downs in life. And today's episode is called You Do Have the Strength, and it was inspired by a recent elementary wrestling tournament. So whether you're in sports or you wrestle, that doesn't matter, right? The content of this video is relevant to you. It's relevant to nearly every single one of us. But it was inspired from a recent elementary wrestling tournament that I went to. I coach wrestling, elementary and high school wrestling. And we were at a recent elementary tournament on Sunday, a couple of days ago. And my son, Rocky, who is 6 years old, he was wrestling in this tournament. And I would share this story whether it was my son or it was another kid wrestling, but it just so happened to be my son. So wrestling is a very difficult sport, right? You win, you lose, you're on the center of the mat. It can be very intimidating, very scary. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, much like life, much like middle school and high school, that goes through your mind as a wrestler. And so Rocky had a great first match, and then he wasn't feeling very well. And then, so something about him, he doesn't say he's not feeling well unless he's not feeling well. So as a parent, it kind of jumped out and thought, okay, well, if he's saying he doesn't feel well, then he probably doesn't feel well. So we went through this a period of a couple hours where he didn't know if he was going to wrestle. He didn't know if he was going to wrestle or not going to wrestle. And to me, I'm the type of person, you do it, you go through it, you get through it. But I understand, he is 6, he's a little kid. So I walked away and my wife handled the situation. But this is the part I want you to tune into. So we decided that he was going to wrestle, but it was still not an easy decision for him to make. He was crying. Now, if you have a little brother or a sister, if you're a parent and you have a little kid, you know that when a kid is crying, it is oftentimes can be an impossible situation. And so he was on deck, meaning his match was up next. And I said to my wife, if he's going to go, we got to go. They weren't going to wait for us. They weren't going to hit pause so we could figure out our situation. And although Rocky decided he was going to wrestle, like I said, it was not an easy decision. And so he was crying, and I was trying to calm him down, and I was, trying to help him kind of get past whatever he was crying about. He felt good enough to wrestle. He was going to wrestle. And so now it was, all right, we have to do this thing. And so I'm holding his hand, walking over to the table to get his anklet. And he's still teary-eyed and he's still crying a little bit. And in my mind, I know that wrestling is already a really scary and intimidating thing. And I see these elementary wrestlers a lot of times cry, not some throwing tantrums, but some just because it's overwhelming and it's scary. So when you think of your life in middle school or high school, you're not, excuse me, you're not on the wrestling mat. But I know personally from my life as a grown-up and as a middle and high schooler, sometimes you feel like just the world is coming in around you. And when you're on the wrestling mat and people are yelling and screaming and someone's coming at you, that's really scary. But that's actually happening. You as a middle or high schooler, me in my life, pretty much every single one of us feels at times like that's happening. Everyone's yelling and screaming. The world is caving in around us. Someone's coming at us. We can't escape. Or it's just like an overwhelming feeling. And so he has this feeling as he's walking to the mat. And I'm 41, and I'm a former lifelong wrestler, a former professional fighter. I train hard. I'm a very intense person. And as I kind of ushered him to the center and I walked off to the side, I had zero idea how this was going to go. And I was very nervous for the situation. It was like an uncomfortable situation. And it was like he put that anklet on his ankle, still with tears in his eyes, but doing it. And then he walked to the center of the mat and he put his toe in the line. And it was like he made a decision. He's only 6. He's not actually thinking about this stuff. He's just doing it. But it was like he made a decision through the tears, through the fear, through the confusion, through the stress to wrestle. And when the ref blew the whistle, he wrestled. He did the thing that he was supposed to do. He did the thing that he was doing in that moment, right? And in your life, it could be any variety of difficult situations, making the right choice, right? Dealing with peer pressure, being open and honest about your feelings, or talking to your principal or your guidance counselor or your mom or your dad, or your fear and anxiety as it relates to sports and school and instruments and art, or whatever it is, the social stresses that you come. The title of this episode is called You Do Have the Strength, meaning Rocky had the strength inside of him to make a decision to face that challenge. And I'm recording this episode to share that story, but also to remind you that you had that strength. Too many times, I know in my own personal life, but I think I can speak generally to all of us. Too many times, especially as a kid, you look at people who are successful. Maybe it's a peer or a classmate of yours or someone in a neighboring rival school or on social media, and you look at people and you think to yourself, man, they've got it all together. They have it all. I wish I was like them. I wish I could do what they do. And I'm here to remind you and to tell you that you can do that thing. You can do that thing. My son did that thing. I'm sure you know people or have seen examples where people do that thing, that they find a strength within themselves that they didn't know they had. I'm a kid who grew up, when I was your age, I grew up with a lot of self-doubt and a lot of fear. Even though I was successful on the mat and in the classroom, I still had all this doubt. Like I was just carrying around all these negative feelings inside, right? Despite the success. And I always thought it was for them, right? Success was for them. And then when I took on professional fighting in a pursuit to become a UFC fighter, all of that fear, the fear of fighting, trust me, the fear of getting in an octagon, the fear of being on TV, of being in an arena where everyone's looking at you and looking across there and seeing some guy come at me who wants to take my head off, for lack of a better way to put it. That is so stinking scary. But I learned that that fear drove me to training and drove me to preparation. And the harder I trained, the more I learned, the more I got knocked down and got back up again, the more strength I developed, and that strength turned into confidence. And so again, the title of this episode is You Do Have the Strength. And it's to remind you that you do have the strength, and to tell you of the process that goes like winning and learning and losing and trying and getting back up again and deciding, just like my son decided, that you do have the strength to do that thing. And that thing can be a variety of different things throughout your life, but it's kind of adversity is the thing that I'm talking about, a difficult, trying, challenging situation. When I started fighting and I developed that confidence, I was just in it and I was just doing it. I'd be in the back and I would be scared and I would be nervous and the camera would be in my face and they'd say 5 minutes and I'd feel like I'd have to throw up and I couldn't feel my legs because I was so nervous. But I did the thing. My son did the thing. You can do the thing. And now when I watch fighting on TV, it's this weird thing. When I watch fighting on TV, I see, these guys and these girls up on the screen. If I'm walking past, Permane Brothers, which is a restaurant that shows sports near where I live. And I look up there and I'm like, oh man, they're so crazy. And then I think to myself, wait a minute, you were one of them. So it's like I have this out of body experience, because I used to think that those people up there are so crazy. They're so strong. They're so tough. I wish I could be like that. And then I became like that. So I have to shift my mind and shift my thoughts to remember, oh, you are one of those people. And I am nothing. I'm not super scary. I'm not super strong. I'm not super anything. I just commit and work hard. And that develops confidence. And that brings the strength that you do have inside of you. It brings it to the surface. So as you kind of as we close this episode and you go into your day or your evening or whenever you're listening, I want you to think about this episode. Think about my son. Think about him crying. Think about him towing the line. Think about him making a decision to wrestle and do that thing. Think of me. Think of someone else in your life who makes that decision. And remember, it's not just for them. It's for you as well. I want to thank you for tuning in to Spaniard School, the Student Podcast. A quick reminder, this podcast is available. It comes out weekly. It is for free. You can watch on YouTube. You can listen via your podcast app. Just search out Spaniard School, the Student Podcast. My website is charliespaniard.com. It's got links to all of my social media. It's got links to everything I put out, my books, my podcasts, etc. That's at charliespaniard.com. You can look in the show notes or the information below for those links. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.